And welcome to Pickwick Monthly, everyone. There we go. Let me stop the share. Welcome to Pickwick Monthly. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And my Pickwickian co-host for today is Jacob Romanow. Hey, Jake, how are you?
I'm great. How's it going?
It is good. I'm saying it right. Romanow, right?
Romano, in fact.
Romanow. I
Yeah,
always mess it up. I'm sorry.
I recognize it either way.
My Pickwickian co-host for today is Jacob Romanow. Hey, Jake, how are you?
I'm great. It's good. It's very Pickwickian actually, because people get the W at the end confused for a V and all kinds of things.
There we go. Yes. Well, maybe are you one of the Rome Ralph descendants? So we'll see.
I
Prince Prince Jacob.
say I am, but if I were, maybe I could pull a scam with it, like a jingle kind of a scam.
There you go. Well done. Well, today, Jake and I, and for 20 months, are talking about Charles Dickens's The Posthumous Papers of the Pickwick Club, as it was first serialized in monthly parts from March 1836 to October 1837. Once a month, myself and a rotating set of co-hosts talk about each serialized part. Along the way, I'll share some of the items in the Rosenbach's collections. We have complete serial issues of the Pickwick Papers, a portion of the Pickwick manuscript. We have many first editions signed by Dickens, the earliest surviving literary manuscript, letters, ephemera. We have a lock of Dickens's hair. All this I'm starting to share now. Today I'm going to share something, and we'll continue every month, and we'll share something new. In today's episode, number 12, chapters 33 and 34, Sam and his father, Tony, are writing a Valentine, and then they disrupt a temperance meeting. And then we have one of the most famous trials of the 19th century, Bardell v. Pickwick. So a trial so famous that it's even cited occasionally in legal, documents, in court trial, actual court trials in the 19th century. But of course it happened. All right. If you are watching live right now, please like and subscribe. I invite you to, and have fun in the live chat if you're watching the recording. I also invite you to please like and subscribe. Like these videos, subscribe to this channel, and I'd love for you to leave comments in the comment field or questions that I would answer. And let's just to start, since last we were here, Jake, we had Dickens's birthday. Did you do anything for Dickens's birthday? Did you at least, were you even
Right.
at least?
I was aware of the day. I did not celebrate, but I did follow what was going on our Facebook page.
There you go.
And I sent my thoughts back to my old neighbors at Clark Park.
Good, because that's where I was. I was at Clark Park in West Philadelphia, where they have the statue of Dickens and Little Nell, and uh, there's a church near there, in a church hall, that we had some readings, and the Morris men came and danced, and our Pickwickian co-host Kevin Quinn and I read a bit from The Goblins Who Stole a Sexton, which was a lot of fun. There are pictures of that on our Facebook group page where people can go to watch. And you, Jake, though, you're teaching Victorian lit right now, aren't you?
I am, and I'm getting ready to teach Dickens. We're midway through Vanity Fair right now,
Ooh.
and when that's done, we have a week of March break, and we come back to Great Expectations. So it should be a good time. They've been having fun with it so far.
We have the complete serial of Vanity Fair at the Rosenbach, as it originally came out in some people know that Thackeray was publishing, just like Dickens, in monthly installments, but I think his were yellow, right?
I think that's right. And
Yeah.
the thing, the only problem with Great Expectations, of course, is that it does not have illustrations.
Yeah.
And that is one good thing about Vanity Fair. He illustrated it himself, so we have all these sort of readily interpretable, and they're all over. It's not, he has chapter vignettes at the top of every chapter, the first letter, and So that's been a great fun to think about.
Thackeray tried out for Dickens, didn't he? Did he try out for
I think
Pickwick
that's right.
Papers?
Yes. I don't know if it was.
As an illustrator.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't
I
know if
don't.
it was that or if he was
I
trying out
remember
for
seeing
something
the
else.
book. Because he was a cartoonist at Punch, among other things.
Yeah.
Mostly he didn't do the illustrations. Mostly he was writing, but
And then, as you mentioned, Great Expectations, that's one of the two serials that Dickens published in his magazine. Was that in All the Year Round?
yeah,
And Tale of Two Cities, was that in Household Words, or was that also All Year Round? I don't know, one of them. But in which case, though, it was a weekly serial and no illustrations in that magazine. So it's a shame that he did, and it's surprising that he didn't then publish it in a monthly format afterwards, because I know he did that with Oliver Twist. Oliver Twist, which was in Bentley's Miscellany with illustrations. Then Dickens just went ahead and published it in monthly anyway a few years later to kind of, I mean, it would get more sales, but it also to kind of make it more uniform with his Bose readers.
maybe by that point it was just, the volumes were selling anyway. So
Yeah, that he doesn't, need that. And well, Dickens always needed income. He didn't live poorly. He spent all the money he made, is what he did. So Vanity Fair would be a good for a future read through. So we'll see if we ever get there. There's so many books to read through. So, and especially in this format, it would take years to get through all of this stuff as it is now. Well, I had one more thing to share before we start. I had a gift from Bob and Kitty, who watch this show and watch other Biblioventures, and they're big supporters of the Rosenbeck. And look at this. This is I think it's a Franklin Mint Dickens characters spoon collection. And in this nice little frame set. And here's Mr. Pickwick. I don't know how blurry he'll get if I try to get him closer. And Sam Weller leading the bunch here. And then there's Oliver and Fagin and Little Nell, who just looks like an adult. And Mrs. Gamp and Bob Cratchit and Tiny Tim and Scrooge and David Copperfield and Micawber, another favorite of mine, and Madame Defarge from Tale of Two Cities, which I think is interesting. Here she is knitting away, and then Micawber. And I'm sorry, and then Magwitch. Yeah, Micawber, and here's Magwitch. So from Great Expectations, but a very fun thing to have. Thank you so much, Bob and Kitty, for this. I absolutely love it. Really nice to get, and it's nice to connect with the audience over these kinds of things too. So all righty, well, spoons and birthday celebrations, and it's been quite a month. The A little bit about Dickens in his life right now. In February, this issue, the 12th number was published at the end of February, but in the beginning of the month, not only did he have his birthday, but he's got the second issue of Bentley's coming out. And that, of course, is going well for him. Dickens is editing Bentley's Miscellany magazine, contributing to it. And now he's also begun the Oliver Twist serial. So he's writing two serials at the same time. And then before the second issue comes out, they release these advertisements here. And I love this. It's Extraordinary Gazette, speech of his mightiest on opening the second number of Bentley's Miscellany, edited by Bose. On Wednesday, the 1st of February, the House of Bentley met for the dispatch of business in pursuance of the proclamation inserted by authority in all the morning, evening, and weekly papers, appointing that day for the publication of the second number of the Miscellany, edited by Bose. And look at this great illustration they put on here. This was done by Fizz, by Hablett Brown. They paid him £5 We know that he got £5 to make this, and here's Bentley's Miscellany and the porter carrying it out, and all the copies are falling off, and everybody's joyous to get them. And there's Charles Dickens, with his little hand in the air, like he's waving graciously, like the monarch of he is. And very young, and yeah, it looks just like him in the you see in the early pictures of him. His hair floppy all over. But I love this little piece here, and it's just a reminder of his life at the time. This is him, grandstanding, presenting all of this literature to them at Bowes, and it's Bowes, really. It's not even Charles Dickens. It's Bowes presenting all this literature to the masses. The it was a 4-page leaflet that was advertising, and Dickens had written in it, "It has been the constant aim of my policy to preserve peace in your minds and promote merriment in your hearts, to set before you scenes and characters of real life in all their endless diversity, occasionally, I hope, to instruct, always to amuse, and never to offend. I trust I may refer you to my Pickwickian measures already taken and still in progress in confirmation of this assurance." And that kind of declaration is what he always continued with, right? Even later when he did his magazines, this idea that, to instruct, amuse, never to offend, that kind of promote merriment in your hearts, scenes and characters of real life and their endless diversity. I'm trying to remember, what's the tagline for Household Words from Henry V. But it's close to that. Maybe someone will drop it into the live chat. But Dickens, the conductor as well, right? Remember, he's the conductor of Household Words. That's the title he gives himself on the masthead, conducted by Charles Dickens. And here he is conducting the literary endeavors of the nation. And what's he, 24 years old, 25 years? He just turned 25. So, yeah, just turned 25 this month. So, top of the world. Well, the 12th number, as I mentioned, was published at the end of February 1837. And the Bardell Pickwick chapter, the Trial of Pickwick, came to be one of the most memorable scenes of the novel, with Sergeant Buzfuz leading the prosecution. I can't wait to get to that. A little reminder, something we don't usually do here, but familiar in their mouths as household words was the tagline I was trying to remember from that magazine. That kind of familiarity that we're all, that we know this life that we're presenting here. So thank you. That was from James, our sometime co-host. Thank you, James. Something I haven't done in a while, Jake, is remember a spoiler reminder. If there are people reading this for the first time and they're going month by month, we don't want to let them know what happens later in the novel. And I mention that because the trial that we're doing today, we know the outcome of the trial, but we don't want to know what happens to these characters later. So don't put that in the live chat. Don't post about it on our Facebook group, Facebook group page. Let's let people discover that as they go along. The consequences of what will occur, we don't want to talk about today, nor do we want, other people talking about it until we get to it. A little spoiler reminder. All righty. All right, Jake, you ready? Chapter 33.
Something to note, though, that we've reached a point in our progress here where a spoiler is a coherent concept, right? We're really in the full stream of the continuing narrative by this point in the novel.
Yeah, it's much less a kind of, event. Well, I don't know. The Bath episode next month is, let's go to Bath and have some adventures there. We still get some adventures, but there are threads now that Dickens is really keeping up as we go through this, if I get your meaning correctly.
Precisely.
Yeah. Which was absolutely not what this whole adventure was originally intended to be from Robert Seymour, that this was just going to be Adventures of the Month. And it still has some of that, but Dickens is in full control. Well, or as in control as he could be with these Pickwickian characters. Chapter 33, Mr. Weller, the elder, delivers some critical sentiments respecting literary composition and, assisted by his son Samuel, pays a small installment of retaliation to the account of the Reverend Gentleman with the red nose. That'll be a lot of fun to hit. It's just 2 chapters this month, but it's just as long. It's not like we have less, to do. Usually it's 3 chapters, but they're a little shorter.
They're jam-packed. It's 3 chapters worth of words, but it's also 3 chapters worth of action.
Yeah, there's a lot in these too. So we'll do our best to get it, done in a reasonable amount of time. Not that Dickens would have cared about that. No, as an editor, he would have cared about that. He has a page count. It's got to get through it. So I should feel more like Dickens, the editor, and trying to get through it all. It's February 13th, the morning of the 13th of February that this chapter starts. And Mr. Samuel Weller, who was perpetually engaged in traveling from the George and Vulture to Mr. Perker's chambers and back again to find out if all is going well. Pickwick is staying at the George and Vulture now because he can't stay at his, Goswell Street, flat anymore because his landlady is suing him. Sam's running back and forth to Mr. Perker, the solicitor, who's handling Pickwick's case, and everything is going as well as possible. Perker says there's nothing really to be done. All the moments where Mr. Pickwick inserts himself, as he did, was it last month when he goes and visits, and he wants to visit the sergeant who's the barrister, who's going to try. People didn't do that. That was and the way the lawyers react in this was the way they reacted, is that you don't do that. They just you give your case to them, and then your legal life is in their hands. But Mr. Pickwick can't help but want to find out what's going on and all of this. Dickens has a little commentary on the law here. People who go voluntarily to law or are taken forcibly there for the first time may be allowed to labor under some temporary irritation and anxiety. He never gets past the criticizing the whole law process throughout his entire life, right? I mean, we even get some of it in Our Mutual Friend, or the last novel. I don't know if we get it much in the half of the last novel, Mystery of Edwin Drood, but it seems to go up to the end.
Yeah, although often with that sort of winking, of course, this is what it used to be like. Right?
Yeah. I mean, there are changes over time that happen, and but it's the system is a mess in Dickens's day, which we'll talk about some today when we get to the trial. But Mr. Pickwick is still treating Sam well. He tells him to make sure he gets make sure he gets enough dinner and a glass of warm mixture, which is what I'm drinking today, a warm mixture. I made a little quick Dickens punch today, rum and brandy and sugar and lemon, but I just made it real quick. So I just had something. So it's not quite brandy and water Luke as Sam will have later, but it's more like the punch, but it's good. I need to stop drinking so quickly, or I'll be loaded by the end of the show. A boy comes to visit. or comes into the bar looking for Sam. We get a little Sam repartee there. Is there anybody here named Sam? What's the other name? Said Sam. How should I know? Replied the young gentleman below the hairy cap. He's got a hairy cap on. Just the little details that are really nice. Young boy of about 3 feet high or thereabouts in a hairy cap and fustian overalls. He's like a young Sam Weller is what he is. Always ready. He's got an answer ready for every question that Sam has. He finds out it's his father searching for him, Sam says. And then, well, young broccoli sprout, what then? And he takes him off to the Blue Boar. And we tell Sam he has to go to the Blue Boar Inn in Leadenhall Market. I was hoping that was going to be a real one, Jake, but it's not. I've been searching all the inns and pubs that are mentioning this, and that's like, why did you make it up? Like all the others are real. I don't know why he had to make one up, or he had one in mind. For some reason, he didn't want to give it the name that it is. We're not sure. So, but there was no Blue Bar in the Leadenhall Market. On the way to the Blue Boar, though, Sam stops at a stationer's. And I like this, Jake, that something that that people forget has begun at this time and had been in effect for a while. The window is decorated for the holiday. I think people start to think that people forget that that's not like a recent thing, like a modern age 20th century thing. It's Valentine's Day, so this stationery store has Valentine decorations in their window to sell their wares, as they would for any. I wonder, like all the other holidays, what they would put up.
Right. Well, and it's, I think we, especially coming off a couple months ago, right, we associate Dickens with the sort of birth of modern Christmas. You can get in your head that, oh yeah, everything is starting up. But this is the opposite, right? This is like medieval tradition that he's pulling out here.
Is it Chaucer that's credited with the sending of
Chaucer
Valentines?
popularizes the Valentine, yeah.
Yeah, sending a Valentine on sending a love letter on St. Valentine's Day, right? Yeah. Well, they have a highly colored representation in the window of a couple of human hearts skewered together with an arrow and a couple, a male and female cannibal in modern attire, as Dickens calls them. And Sam realizes, I almost forgot. And he goes in, he gets a sheet of gilt-edged letter paper and a hard-nibbed pen, which could be warranted not to splutter. And I have a little bit on nibs and pens because why not? They first there were reed pens. People used a reed and they cut it and they used that as a pen. Then there were quills, but there had actually always been these metal nibs, these little, caps or little points you put on the end of some kind of stylus for pens, but they weren't popular in England until the 19th century, and they started to be manufactured in like around the 1820s. You can really use anything for the pen or the stylus part, but they would also sell that with a nib attached to it. That seems to be what Sam has purchased here. And I've got this great advertisement from this company called McNiven and Cameron, who made pen nibs. And there it is. And they have the Pickwick, the Owl, or the Waverley. The Waverley named after Scott and Pickwick. I don't know if the owl is a particular reference to an author. I don't think it is, but I could be wrong, and I would love to find out if that is the case, if anybody knows. But this particular line here with these three even had a little jingle, and it was, "They come as a boon and a blessing to men, the Pickwick, the Owl, and the Waverley Pen." So, and these were very famous. This is more towards the end of the 19th century. But but
So
obviously
are we into past the Owl and the Pussycat by the time this starts?
that would be odd. I don't think that was that popular. Not on the level of Scott and Dickens. You know what
Certainly.
I mean? And but yeah. So but Dickens also I think as far as I know, he always used a quill pen, you know, the feather, but it had a metal nib on it. It wasn't just the feather cut and that he would have to keep kind of mending. I'm pretty certain he had a metal nib on the end of his quill pen. Um,
Though,
but
of course, Sam's hard-nibbed pen doesn't stop him a couple pages later from encountering a whole lot of blots.
well, I think that might be due to the writer. And his lack of experience with writing, as we'll get into, because he goes through this. Well, he sees the signboard of the blue boar, which more resembles a cerulean elephant, a blue elephant with an aquiline nose in lieu of a trunk instead of a boar, but he knows that's where he's supposed to go. And he goes in and he asks for 9 pennyworth of brandy and water, Luke, and the inkstand. And the Luke is lukewarm. He wants brandy and water warm. And the way they used to serve it then was they would just put the brandy in a glass and they would pour hot water in it, boiling water from a kettle in there to make it that way. So I have heated up the entire concoction on the stove altogether. So I can have some sugar in it too. I just didn't want brandy and water. That's actually kind of gross, I think. I need more than that for my punch.
Like tea made out of brandy.
Yeah, there you go. Brandy tea is what it is. So, um, the young lady flattens down the coals and takes the poker away, so Sam can't mess with the fire because that's money in an establishment. They have to supply the coals there. So and then and then we get this little passage of Sam as in Sam, the non-writer posing as a writer that Dickens seems to be, having fun with here. Do you want to read that little to ladies and gentlemen who are not in the habit?
To ladies and gentlemen who are not in the habit of devoting themselves practically to the science of penmanship, writing a letter is no very easy task, it being always considered necessary in such cases for the writer to recline his head on his left arm so as to place his eyes as nearly as possible on a level with the paper, and while glancing sideways at the letters he is constructing, to form with his tongue imaginary characters to correspond. These motions, although unquestionably of the greatest assistance to original composition, retard in some degree the progress of the writer, and Sam had unconsciously been a full hour and a half writing words in small text, smearing out wrong letters with his little finger, and putting in new ones, which required going over very often to render them visible through the old blots, when he was roused by the opening of the door and the entrance of his parent.
I love this Dickens kind of making fun of this, writer posture that Sam would have to go through and how but it's the truth. Like writing is a messy process in the 19th century. It's so easy for us with the kinds of pens that we have now, or really hardly anybody even uses pens anymore. Everybody's on their keyboards, but writing was messy. And if you're not someone like Dickens who is, or constantly or even a business person, just writing letters all day long and constantly using, pen and ink, as Sam is not someone who does that. This could be a really
Well, and indeed, as we know, right, Dickens uses writing slopes and all sorts of assistive technology.
yeah.
Sam's bring me the inkwell at the bar.
That's all he's got, and a brand new pen. And I hope I don't know. I think he bought one sheet of paper, maybe. So it's just going to be a wreck by the end. I'm not sure Mary's going to be able to read this at all. Um, well, Sam's father comes in. Well, Sammy, said the father, Vel, my Prussian blue, Sam says. And boy, I got to tell you, I just got so many little things that took me down rabbit holes in this. That Prussian blue. Um, in my penguin, he has something. It's like his father's face is blue. It's I think all this is it's some kind of variant of it's like some kind of Cockney slang thing. It's a variant of saying my true blue. Instead of my true blue, you say Prussian blue. Um, and it's not a pure Cockney kind of slang here, which is usually two words for one, and one of the words rhymes. Um, Army and Navy means gravy, jam tart means heart, that kind of thing. Um, it's interesting that Dickens becomes so popular, he becomes a part of slang, and that Barnaby Rudge means judge, and Artful Dodger means lodger. So people would wind up using Dickens names because they're so inventive, and wind up as part of this slang game that would happen. But that Prussian blue as a variant of my true blue kind of, works in a way that is similar, I think. And and Sam right away wants to know if, how's it going with the mother-in-law, with Tony's widow wife. It's terrible, of course, as always. He can't, get over that. But when he asks Sam what is he writing, and he says it's a Valentine, and his father is horrified, right? Like, the one thing Sam should not do ever is be romantically involved with somebody. And he's horrified. He's so horrified that these reflections were too much for the good old man. He raised Sam's tumbler to his lips and drank off its contents. So horrified that I have to have a quick drink, but of course it's Sam's because he hasn't ordered his drink yet. And we get a Wellerism. Mr. Weller says, I'm pretty tough. That's one consolation, as the wary old turkey remarked when the farmer said he was afeard he should be obliged to kill him for the London market. That's a good Wellerism too, from the source of Wellerisms, Tony Weller. I'm pretty tough. That's one consolation, as the very old turkey remarked when the farmer said he was afraid he should be obliged to kill him for the London market. And then he orders a pipe, and Sam says, order in your pipe and I'll read you the letter. A little touch of the 19th century there. You didn't bring your pipe. You order a pipe just like you order a drink. Boy, I would love that. I'd love to go into a bar and say, I'll have a pipe and a pipe and a pint. And they'd bring me out a long churchwarden clay pipe, and I would smoke it like he does.
With a very theatrical air.
Yes, of course. So there's a picture of somebody did later of Dickens smoking a churchwarden clay I'm certain it was drawn after Dickens's life, so we don't know whether Dickens actually would smoke these in taverns, but I don't know why he wouldn't. And here it is. I love this picture. Charles Dickens, A Quiet Pipe at the Canterbury. The Canterbury was a music hall, actually. And this illustration came from a journal called Entr'acte, which was about, the musicals and the shows and the plays being produced towards the end of the century after Dickens is dead. And I think it was in a piece about Dickens's day in the music halls and how he might visit them. But there he is smoking a long clay pipe, much like Tony Weller would have, even though that's a fictional representation. Well, even the prospect of a pipe, or the consolatory reflection that a fatal disposition to get married ran in the family and couldn't be helped, calmed Mr. Weller's feelings, and after being greatly mollified by the softening influence of tobacco, tells Sam to read the Valentine. I it's Jake, it's because I'm a pipe smoker, I can't help but like mention every single tiny mention of smoking that goes
But
on.
it gets a prominent place in the illustration.
It does. It does. When we share the illustration, that's a matter of fact, we'll share that now. And here we go. And here's the first illustration from Fizz for this issue. Make it a little bigger. And there he is, Tony Weller with the pipe here, Sam with his pen. It looks like, I think this is the, can't tell, because it looks like there's a little feather on the end here. So I think this might be a quill. And then I see on the table here, looks like quills as well. Sam's drink, the inkwell, there's a spent pipe here. I like the messiness of this too. Look, there's like a pile of old cups here, old pots for the drink, and there's a couple of trays on the floor. Look, there's an old spent pipe down on the floor here at the very bottom. Here's the servant go out here waiting to bring in Tony's drink. She's already like, she knows he's going to order. She's just waiting to bring it in. There's a cat on the chair. And of course, I can't help but not notice this in the back. You see this? Guinness Dublin Stout. There's a Guinness advertisement in a Dickens novel. I love that. I wanted to have Guinness today, but because it snowed, we didn't go out to the store to get any Guinness. But oh, that's just fabulous. This is a great illustration. The detail all through this is really good. Their expressions. Tony Weller is as fat as ever in this. I just love it.
And the great sort of inside outside thing with that servant girl who's in so much lighter
Yeah.
rendering. Something it makes it feel like you're warm in the room, right?
Yeah, on all the light center. Look how the light centers around these two characters here in the center of it. Really well done. So, the and then Tony asks for he says a double glass of the invariable, my dear. Oh man, I love that slang for a drink, a glass of the invariable. And I'm thinking like I gotta find this somewhere else. I can't find it anywhere else in the 19th century in any kind of text mentioned. It seems that he means like, his own constant, never changing, unvarying kind of drink. The usual, like this is his term for the usual, a glass of the invariable. And she's got it ready, so there it is. But and what do they say? Sam says, they seem to know your ways here. Yes, I've been here before in my time. I'm gonna use that, a glass of the invariable. And I'm certain I'll just get stared at. Like, what? What do you want? So a Guinness and a whiskey. So that's what I want. That's my invariable. Well, Sam starts reading and it begins lovely creature. And his father right away is like, oh no, tain't poetry, is it? This is his, as we were told in the beginning of this chapter that the critical sentiments respecting literary compositions from Tony Weller is what we're going to have here. Poetry's unnatural. No man ever talked poetry except the Beadle on Boxing Day or Warren's Blacking or Roland's Oil or some of them low fellows. Never you let yourself down to talk poetry, my boy. That idea that poetry is only suitable for the Beadle asking for his, Christmas presents on Boxing Day or something. Maybe he has some kind of set speech that he would do, but then also the advertising, right? Who speaks in poetry? People advertising goods speak for poetry. And of course, we notice.
I mean, the Beetle and the Blacking Company are about as low fellows as you can get in the Dickens universe, right?
Well, and especially Warren's blacking, which this isn't the only time that Warren's blacking gets called out in Dickens's works. And that is where he worked as a 12-year-old child, pasting labels on the bottles, as his father and the rest of the family were in the debtor's prison in the debtor's prison, which name I can't remember on top of my head. Fleet Street. No, not Fleet. Is it? What's that?
Marshalsea?
Yeah, the Marshalsea. Thank you. They're in the Marshalsea. And young Charles is sent out to work in the blacking factory while they're there. Is it even the first time? No, it's even mentioned twice in this novel. The other mention was back in chapter 10, and it was stimulated by this inspiring reflection. Mr. Samuel brushed away with such hearty goodwill, brushing the boots, that in a few minutes the boots and shoes, with a polish which would have struck envy to the soul of the amiable Mr. Warren, for they used Day and Martin in the White Hart. And this kind of, it gets mentioned twice. And the first time, Dickens even said, they don't even use your stuff at this place. So, and then the other mention there is the Rowland's oil, which is the Macassar oil, which people would put in their hair, and hence the anti-macassars on the furniture are invented later. And you see Rowland's hair oil in so many, 19th century, advertisements, including this one right here. For this month in the number 12, there was a Rowland's oil advertisement here, Rowland's Calidor, and other, items that Rowland's would make. So it's, Rowland's must be so excited. Like, we're advertising and you're calling us out. Like, did they get, like, product placement is what it is. I don't think they were paying for that, but they got it. So,
Although not in such good company.
yeah. They, all right. Well, Sam then reads the letter reads the Valentine with all kind of, funny interruptions, and we can't go through the whole thing. My goodness, it would just be a dramatic reading here, right? Lovely creature, I feel myself a damned. That ain't proper, said Mr. Weller. No, it ain't damned, said Sam, holding the letter up to the light. It's shamed. There's a blot there. I feel myself ashamed. He can't read it. He's got to go through this. He has to figure out what the words that he's written are. Well, here's the Valentine. You ready? Lovely creature, I feel myself ashamed and completely circumscribed in addressing of you. For you are a nice gal and nothing but it. Afore I see you, I thought all women was alike. But now I find what a regular soft-headed, incredulous turnip I must have been. For there ain't nobody like you, though I like you better than nothing at all. So I take the privilege of the day, Mary, my dear, as the gentleman in difficulties did. Then he walked out of a Sunday, little Wellerism, to tell you that the first and only time I see you, your likeness was took on my heart in much quicker time and brighter colors than ever a likeness was took by the Profile machine, which perhaps you may have heard on, Mary, my dear, although it does finish a portrait and put the frame and glass on complete with a hook at the end to hang it up by, and all in 2 minutes and a quarter, accept of me, Mary, my dear, as your Valentine, and think over what I've said. My dear Mary, I will now conclude. And then they have to figure what to sign it. He says, ain't you going to sign it? God, you read Sam there. Do you have that there?
Yeah, that's the difficulty. I don't know what to sign it.
Sign it Veller, said the oldest surviving proprietor of that name.
Won't do, said Sam. Never sign a Valentine with your own name.
Sign it Pickwick, then, said Mr. Weller. It's a very good name and an easy one to spell.
The very thing, said Sam. I could end with a worse. What do you think?
I don't like it, Sam, rejoined Mr. Weller. I never knowed a respectable coachman as wrote poetry, except one as made an affecting copy of verses the night before he was hung for a highway robbery, and he was only a Cambervell man, so that's no rule.
But Sam was not one to be dissuaded from the poetical idea that had occurred to him, and so he signed the letter, Your lovesick Pickwick.
Your lovesick Pickwick ends with a little rhyme. All righty. Well, we'll see if that's going to lead to trouble later, as we assume that it will. Signed as Valentine Pickwick. I love that little detail. Well, he addresses it. It's to Mary, housemaid at Mr. Nupkins, Mayor's, Ipswich, Suffolk, where they were staying, where they wind up visiting, and they saved the Nupkins from Jingle, and Sam gets to, kiss the housemaid as they're looking for his hat. Was it? I think his hat he left behind, and they had to find it. And this is his Valentine. Well, now they talk a little bit about the trial. Of course, Mr. Weller has advice. He says he's got friends who can give Pickwick an alibi, because he must need it. He'll need an alibi. That's the only way he can escape conviction, is with an alibi. Sam tries to tell him that's not what this is, but Tony doesn't know. And now we get to why Tony has asked Sam to come to begin with, and that is because it's about Stiggins, the Reverend Stiggins, the red-nosed man, inquired Sam, the worry same. He's such a friend of the family, Sammy, that when he's away from us, he can't be comfortable unless he has something to remember us by. He always brings now a flat bottle, as holds about a pint and a half, and fills it up with the pineapple rum before he goes away, and then comes back with it empty. But he has a plot now, Mr. Weller, that there is a temperance meeting, the Brick Lane branch of the United Grand Junction Ebenezer Temperance Association, a great Dickensian name for an organization that he's kind of making fun of, but they're really not. It's really not all that different than what these organizations were named at the time. And he has a plot. He's going to have two friends get Stiggins drunk and bring him to the Temperance Association. All these ladies know Stiggins, and they all admire him and think he's this upright, Christian gentleman, and he's going to show him up, bring him there drunk, so then everyone will hate him, and hijinks will ensue. So he has 2 tickets to attend, and so he wants Sammy to come with him to watch this. Temperance meetings were, the whole temperance movement against drinking alcohol was a massive thing in the 19th century, and I think it's only the 19th century. Am I wrong? It might get its start at the end of the 18th, but doesn't really pick up steam until the 19th century.
Yeah, that's right. And of course it's associated with all these other kinds of sort of activism and low church evangelism that gets derided throughout this novel and others. But there is something, temperance is about as un-Pickwickian a virtue as you could come up with, right? We've talked about he's eating, he's drinking at the end of every chapter.
Yeah.
That's the way to restore conviviality. So it makes good sense to me that these folks would be a particular butt within this novel.
Yeah, and for Dickens in his life too. These are the kinds of people he likes to satirize, even though the temperance movement, especially in the 19th, alcohol, drugs, these kinds of, they're always an issue and have always been a problem. But in the 19th century, especially, when you had very few options of what to drink anyway, and even before then too. It's not just the 19th century. It's before then too, that water is not a good thing to drink for most people because water is frequently contaminated. You don't have a lot of choices outside of, I mean, tea becomes, a big drink in England, but it's there now at this novel for the 19th century. But before then, tea hadn't been as big. It wasn't until really they could secure the plantations and the empire, and that tea becomes a bigger product. There's just not a lot to drink, and it's not unfrequent for people to drink, very low alcoholic content beer in the morning for breakfast. Wine, these things, when there's alcohol in the liquid, it's safe to drink pretty much, as opposed to other things which could easily be contaminated. So, it's not unusual that I'm always amazed by that history was able to move on at all, knowing how much our ancestors drank. I mean, they drank a lot all the time. And I don't know how they just weren't consistently drunk completely all the time. I mean, you just read these accounts of, how much they were drinking, historical figures all the time, and they managed to get things done. I don't know how. I don't get that much done. So, and I don't drink nearly as much as they did in the past. As I'm drinking, I say this.
But it's interesting too that, I mean, the joke on Stiggins, among other elements here, is really about hypocrisy, right? I mean, as much as this temperance society is kind of poked fun at, they're not really the main butt of the joke in this chapter. They're being defrauded by this charlatan, and that's the real reveal.
And their religious attitudes. It's not like Dickens is saying religion is bad. Your Christianity, Christianity is bad. He's saying you people are hypocrites in the way you practice these things, and that's what he's always tried to skewer, the hypocrisy of his society. Well, they get to the meeting, and it's just like, you could just read the entire meeting, and it's just every moment of it is hilarious. They have a report. The president is Mr. Anthony Hum, and the secretary is Mr. Jonas Mudge, who was a Chandler shopkeeper, an enthusiastic and disinterested vessel who sold tea to the members. They have the box there to take the money. Mr. Weller is alarmed at the amount of tea that the women are drinking. There's a young woman on the next form but two has drunk 9 breakfast cups and a half, and she's a swelling visibly before my very eyes. Which is funny. I mean, the irony too is that all he does is drink booze all the time in every scene we see him in, and he's worried about these women drinking tea. But they come and they give the report, and the report is just one little funny joke after another. These kind of ridiculous people talking about how drinking has destroyed their lives, when it's clear on us reading them that drink had nothing to do with it. H. Walker is now out of work and penniless, thinks it must be the porter, cheers, or the loss of the use of his right hand, is not certain which, but thinks it very likely that if he had drunk nothing but water all his life, his fellow workmen would never have stuck a rusty needle in him. And Betsy Martin, widow, 1 child and 1 eye, goes out charring and washing by the day, never had more than 1 eye, but knows her mother drank bottled stout, and shouldn't wonder if that caused it. Immense cheering. Thinks it not impossible that if she had always abstained from spirits, she might have had 2 eyes. By this time, tremendous applause. And each story in this report is just like that. That this kind of, which has a bearing actually on the court scene we see next too, but I'll bring that up then. It's the same kind of testimony. And then they all sing a song. They sing "The Jolly Young Waterman," which was a song at the time, but they sing it to the tune of the Old Hundredth, which I guess is a psalm, the 100th Psalm. The music for that. But they're singing like this popular song about a waterman who gets all the women. But of course, for them, they're hearing waterman and they're thinking, water drinker is what he is, and they think it's hilarious, or they think it's wonderful. Immense cheering. I love all the cheers, immense cheering, applause, rapturous cheering that you get in parentheses all through this chapter.
It's interesting too that the novel begins right with that extended joke on the parliamentary report.
Yeah.
Pickwickian reporter, narrator voice. And even though we lose that sort of structure for the most part by this point, there is a sort of analogy, I think not just with the court scene that we're about to talk about, but all the way back to that sort of proceedings, the Pickwick Club kind of mentality, right? There's a cross-culture tendency towards this kind of bureaucratic pseudo-language in this novel.
Which Dickens is very aware of as the reporter that he is, constantly reporting on this kind of language in Parliament, in elections, and whatever kind of committee meetings have to go on. He's constantly reporting all of this language, and then now that I'm going to write fiction, I'm going to make fun of it all. Well, Stiggins shows up, of course, completely drunk, and then proceeds to argue with everybody. Fight. He says, they'd say, are you okay? And he's like, I believe no man here has ventured to say that I am not all right, sir. And then he accuses everyone there of being drunk. It's my opinion, sir. It's my opinion, sir, that this meeting is drunk, sir. And then he starts swinging and hitting people. And Mr. Weller sees his chance. And without further invitation, he gave the Reverend Mr. Stiggins a preliminary tap on the head and began dancing around him in a buoyant and cork-like manner, which in a gentleman at his time of life was a perfect marvel to behold. Big fat Mr. Weller is dancing around him, hitting him in the head and loving this. And Sam has to pull him out and get him out of there. And then then there's the removal of the Reverend Mr. Stiggins to strong lodgings for the night, which means he was thrown in the clink. He was dropped in jail for the night to sleep off his public drunkenness. So Tony has gotten a measure of revenge against Stiggins. Well, that is perfect timing. Yes, I would. Somebody in the chat has mentioned if I would like Dog's Nose. Dog's Nose is one of the drinks mentioned in the report. And it is, I love it because they even give a little recipe here. This is the one who has lost his right hand. He says, he had been in the constant habit of drinking ale and beer. So he is not certain whether he did it not twice a week for 20 years taste Dog's Nose, which your committee find upon inquiry to be compounded of warm porter, moist sugar, gin, and nutmeg, a groan. And so it is, from an elderly female. Yeah, Dog's Nose is delicious, and I've had it before, and we made that. I made that one time for a Drinking with Dickens event, so it was a lot of fun. But I would like a Dog's Nose and have no fear that it will ruin my life. But let me take this moment in the middle here to take a mid-break and thank all of you for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to hundreds of fellow Dickens lovers worldwide. If you would like to donate to the Rosenbach, you can do so at our website. You could also become a member. Membership gives you free museum admission and discounts on programs and courses, exclusive invitations to member-only events. You can learn more about how to become a member on our website as well. And Rosenbach membership does make a great gift. We've had plenty of people give Rosenbach memberships as gifts. There are lots of great in-person and virtual programs and courses at the Rosenbach on view right now. And you guys will be the first to hear it. A little sneak preview. I won't give you the details yet. I would just tell you that there will be a Dickens course coming up in the spring, an online course. I will reveal what that is next month. I will not be teaching it. We have a great, great professor teaching this online Dickens course. I'll reveal what that is next month when people can register for it. And members get to register first. So members get like a 2-week, lead, or a week, get to register a week ahead of time before the general public does. Another benefit of membership. Our latest biblio-venture, Sherlock Mondays, is still running weekly. If you want to have some fun in between your Pickwick episodes, you can tune in live on Monday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, or you can just watch the replays on the Rosenbach's YouTube channel. They're all there. There's 20 episodes there now. There's number 21 coming up with the adventure of the Gloria Scott, the Sherlock Holmes origin story. There actually is one. There's an origin story adventure that he goes on, and it is the Gloria Scott, and that's the one that will be in the next episode. If you register for Sherlock Mondays on the Rosenbach's webpage, I will send you emails every week, and that also include a recipe for a Sherlock tale, because we drink while we talk about Sherlock. Every week I'll send you that recipe and links to the show. Remember, everyone, you can write to me at epettit@rosenbach.org. That's EPETTIT @rosenbach.org. And I may share your questions, comments on this segment called The Corresponding Members of Pickwick Monthly. A couple people sent me info and pictures about Dickens themed puzzles, because we mentioned puzzles last time, and this ice skating that James had shared, this ice skating Dickens scene as a puzzle. People wrote about that, but also here's what I wanted to mention this week. Henrietta J wrote to me about Percy Fitzgerald's book Bardell versus Pickwick. As she says, as it greatly improves one's understanding of the trial, it was more amusing than we can suspect. Dickens followed the rules for trial exactly, not much exaggeration needed. Modern readers think it a joke, but it was accurate to the laws and procedure of that day. Thank you, Henrietta. I was aware of this book, and I was waiting for this coming up part, Jake, to read it, because I wanted it fresh in my I wanted to read it right before we did this. And the whole book title is Bardell v. Pickwick: The Trial for Breach of Promise of Marriage, held at the Guildhall sittings on April 1st, 1828. He's got a different date for it, before Mr. Justice Stareleigh and a special jury of the City of London. And it is, and I posted about it on our Facebook group page this week too. It's just a really great little book from the 1899, something like that. I can't remember the exact year it's published. 1901, right around then, turn of the century. Fitzgerald published this. And he treats it as the trial as like people play the game with Sherlock Holmes. You know this, Jake, that people like write things about like as if all this stuff really happened.
I see you got the big hardcover 2-volume back right behind you.
For my all my Dickens books are back here. All the Sherlock books are back here, yeah, for the Sherlock Monday shows. But yeah, and Fitzgerald does the same thing with this trial in this book. So it's really fascinating. The book does give spoilers. If you're just reading this book for the first time and you don't want to know what happens afterwards, you're going to find out when you read this, because he mentions, the consequences of the trial all through it. Percy Fitzgerald, though, fascinating guy. He was actually a contributor to Dickens's Household Words and the All Year Round magazines. And then he later wrote several biographies of Dickens, including 7 books dedicated to the Pickwick. The History of Pickwick, An account of its characters, localities, allusions, and illustrations, 1891. Pickwickian Manners and Customs, 1897. Pickwickian Studies, 1899. The Pickwickian Dictionary Encyclopedia, 1900. The Pickwickian Wit and Humor, 1903. Pickwick Riddles and Perplexities, 1912. And then also the already mentioned Bardell v. Pickwick that he wrote. And then he also wrote a book called Bowsland, Dickens's Places and People in 1895, and Memories of Charles Dickens with an Account of Household Words and All the Year Round in 1913. I mean, Percy Fitzgerald, in one sense, was this kind of, Dickens, I mean, he was like almost like the leading writer of things about Dickens, and especially about Pickwick Papers at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. And I've been reading myself all these Fitzgerald works, and they're really, just so fun, and he's so dedicated to Dickens. They're not critical in the sense that he's giving kind of, critical analysis of the text. He's just loving them and enjoying them and sharing everything and connecting all the dots, and it's just a blast. So I love Fitzgerald stuff, and thanks, Henrietta, for reminding me of that, and all of us of that. And I will be reading more Fitzgerald as well. I love to hear from all of you. So if anyone has a question or comment about the serial part for the month, or just Dickens in general, don't hesitate to drop me a note at epettit@rosenbach.org. Have you ever read any Percy Fitzgerald yet, Jake?
I can't say I have, but it sounds like I gotta get going.
And I mean, and you're a trained scholar, and you do work, and you work in the field, do that kind of stuff. But I tell you, there's nothing like going back to these, 18th century writers about literature and books, late 19th, early 20th. I just love reading their accounts of them, because there's so much joy in them too, that they're invested in reading literature in a way that, you don't get that sense as much when you read contemporary criticism. So, all righty. I'm not going to go on that tangent. Let's go to the trial. Need some more punch for this. Chapter 34 is wholly devoted to a full and faithful report of the memorable trial of Bardell against Pickwick. Well, the morning begins with Mr. Perker, Pickwick's solicitor, hoping the jury is well fed, because apparently a well-breakfasted juryman is a capital thing, and a discontented or hungry juryman always finds for the plaintiff. That's probably still true.
It is. There's studies that show that the conviction rates are significantly differ depending on what happens before or after lunch and these kinds of things.
Yeah.
So Parker may be onto something.
Parker's aware of it already. That this is the way, that it's not about justice, people. It's about all kinds of other little, things that have a bearing on the actual trial as it is going on. Well, now they head off, but they're going to head off to the to the Guildhall, to the courtrooms at Guildhall. They get into the carriage, and it's Sam Weller, Mr. Loden, and the blue bag following in another cab. If people don't know, a blue bag is something that solicitors and barristers have in England, and they still do. It's usually, used to store their books or their wigs. I think it was originally for their wigs and robes, but they also put books in there. They can put their papers in there. It's, it's traditional. And they now, if you become a solicitor barrister, you get one, and you get your initials on it, and everybody's got one. And they had them then too. They get to the courtroom. It is a I note that it's this tiered seating, and then we'll look at a picture of it when we get to that point of the trial. We'll look at Fiz's illustration, but it's this kind of tiered seating that goes on, and the people who are on trial, the defendant, plaintiff, are at the bottom, and then it tiers up behind them with the lawyers representing them, and then other lawyers who are just there to observe things, and other clerks maybe, and then the general audience up at the top. But this kind of thing where you can't really, and it's just like now, it's flat, but this tiered way that they're all put in there, and Mr. Pickwick has to be told where to sit, and it's all very regimented of where everybody is supposed to be. And it's something you really gather in this Percy Fitzgerald book. And Percy Fitzgerald was also an actual barrister in Ireland before he becomes a full-time writer in England. And he knows the court system really well. So that Percy Fitzgerald book I was talking about is a lawyer familiar with the courts writing about a trial. And he, of course, understands that, just as Henrietta J. wrote to us, that Dickens is portraying a trial as accurately as he possibly can, that would have happened at the time. So one of the sergeants come in, and they have a crimson bag, blue bags. Once you hit a certain level, you get a red bag or a crimson bag here. Just that's all that is. And the judge comes in, and it's Mr. Justice Stareleigh, a most particularly short man, and so fat that he seemed all face and waistcoat. He rolled in, and sits at his desk. They discover that there are only 10 special jurymen present for this case, that they had gathered together a jury, but now there's only 10. And then someone asked me about this, so I'll definitely mention it. Mr. Sergeant Buzfuz, who is the for the prosecution, who is representing Mrs. Bardell, said, upon this, Mr. Sergeant Buzfuz prayed a tales, Tales, which is, according to the my Penguin notes, which I can rely on this time, is a legal term, and it means that when a jury is short and you need to supplement them with people who are present in the courtroom or standing by in the area, that's when you pray a tales. And the tales is short, actually, for the Latin term tales de circumstantibus, which means such persons from like the surrounding area. That's all it means. So there you go. That's what praying a tales is. And they get a chemist and they press him into service, and another guy, a greengrocer and a chemist. And of course, the chemist is, afraid that he doesn't have an assistant. The judge is like, so this is like you go to court now. Like if you're a jury now, I have to go to work. No, well, tough. You're not going to work. You're here at the jury today. That's not the reason that they're going to let you off jury duty. That I don't have an assistant, and Stareleigh just like, well, then you should have hired one. Well, I can't afford it. Well, you ought to be able to afford it. Like there's nothing I can do. You're here to be on the jury. And it's the beginning of this, what we'll see throughout the trial and the judge, where it's not the judge isn't smart. It's just the judge doesn't care. He has no concern for anybody at all. It's just, this is what it is, and you've just got to do what you have to do here.
He starts on a bad note, and it only gets
yeah, well, it gets worse too, of course. Yes. He also can't hear, but and he has to take notes. So, well, Mrs. Bardell comes in, supported by Mrs. Cluppins, led in and placed in a drooping state. At the sight of her child, she started, suddenly recollecting herself. She kissed him in a frantic manner, then relapsing into a state of hysterical imbecility, the good lady requested to be informed where she was. Mrs. Cluppins and Mrs. Sanders turned their heads away and wept. Sergeant Buzfuz rubbed his eyes very hard with a large white handkerchief and gave an appealing look towards the jury. This, showmanship, this, history, like nobody believes. I mean, no one believes that this is really what they're feeling now. It's one of the interesting things about this, Jake, is that we'll see later with Mrs. Bardell, but at this point in the novel, it's not like she's portrayed sympathetically at all, and that she's really portrayed as as this kind of that she's grasping and trying to get money out of someone when she knows it's not true. And everybody doesn't think that it's true. Or does she think it's true? Because she's not portrayed as really believing this. And the way we see her here all upset, we don't really believe that she's that upset.
I take it to be, she was at the time of the initial happening,
she believed it.
It was a legitimate miscommunication, right? And I think that I don't think it's just greed. I think there's a bit of revenge here, right? It's like she's been made a fool of, and she's going to show him.
Which might be what the lawyers had told her when they came and found her. So a little bit on breach of promise, of marriage in the 19th century. Breach of promise used to be, back in like the 17th century and half the 18th, it was a church court thing, that if you believed you were engaged and someone broke it off, you actually had to go to the church court, because it's the Church of England and they would make those decisions. But in 1754, that power was taken away from clergymen and given to the civil courts, that the courts finally recognized, the government recognized this is actually a civil matter and it deals with money. It shouldn't really be, a spiritual issue. So, and since 1754, then throughout the rest of the 18th century and into the 19th, lawyers really start to represent women who are starting to get serious money in some of these cases. And it's basically, once the lawyers are in charge, that's when the money settlements tended to grow then. And by the time you get to the 1820s, what would happen was solicitors started to realize this. And so that what they would do is they would speculate, and they would go out and they would go into neighborhoods, and when they would hear some kind of gossip like this, they would find people and say and present them like, if that was the case, if you were jilted by somebody, we can get money for this. So much like all of the lawyer advertisements all you see on TV today, like, oh, you had an injury, were you injured, and you can get money. And they were doing the same thing. They were getting people to. And what they would do is they started to do it on these no-win, no-fee basis. This is like, it's not going to cost you anything. You win, you get the money, and we get our cut, obviously, but you don't have to pay up front. And so that, of course, really increases not just the number of cases, but increases the number of cases coming from the working class, coming from the lower spectrum of this, very rigid class society. It is the 1820s and 1830s. What happened was most juries just seemed to be like, yeah, we'll just help the woman. Like, oh, this poor woman, this guy's got money. Let's give and they were just deciding on this kind of class-based attitude that like she should have some money, even when and they were getting to punish people with money, which they really like to do. And sometimes they would find for the woman, especially if there's an economic disparity here and she doesn't have money, they would find for her, but then only award her £1 in damages, because they knew that then he had to pay all the court costs. They were like saying, we'll fine for you, but we don't really believe that this went on, but they would still fine for them anyway. And this happened frequently. There's lots of records of this happening. And what's fascinating here is we read everybody going through. It's like, well, why isn't Mr. Pickwick going up and saying what happened, defending himself? The plaintiff and the defendant were not allowed to testify in these cases. That changes later in the century, but at this time when this happened, it doesn't change like something like the 1760s or I'm sorry, the 1860s. But right now, they're not allowed to testify. And the thought was that, well, they would just lie. I mean, they're the most, biased people in the thing, so we can't trust their testimony. But they're not allowed to defend themselves. And then later the law gets changed and where they can volunteer to if they want. So they wouldn't be forced to testify, but they can volunteer, just like, criminal trials happen now. But this whole chapter and what it's about, this breach of promise, kind of becomes so famous in the 19th century, and shortly after becomes famous too, that people kind of treat it like it really happened, like that Dickens is like presenting an actual case. And I think it's because he writes it so well, and pays such close attention to the way a trial really goes on. I even had a reference in one book that it said in 1850, a justice actually refers to the Pickwick Papers in his instruction to the jury, that uses it as an example for the jury to consider, what's happened in this case. So, so that's a little bit about breach of promise to marry, and where Dickens is at, where his audience is at, and how they feel. And in the 1830s, his readership, especially this kind of, lower middle class or working class readers or listeners of this novel, are all, they would all been on the side of Mrs. Bardell anyway. Like, Pickwick, you fool. You shouldn't have, done it this way. You should give her some money. You should pay for something. Would have been seen to be like the attitude that people would have had, not this like injustice. He hasn't done anything wrong. A lot of people would just kind of figure, well, he's got money anyway, so why can't he just give something to Mrs. Bardell and then go away? But the trial is a sham, and that's what Dickens really wants to show us, is how ridiculous all of this, is. I don't recall. I don't recall many other breach of promise situations in 19th century novel, like famous. I mean, I know it happens, but are there any other really famous ones, Jake, that you can recall, or this really occurs? I can't think of.
That's a good question. I think it gets talked about, but that actually go forward. I'm trying to think. I think there's a Gilbert and Sullivan about it. Is that?
Yeah, yeah, that happens later, though.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course.
But so much to be gotten out of this. I just don't think there's any of the accounts that have just become famous novels that we know of now.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, there are lots of plots of breaches of promise.
Yeah.
It's interesting that they don't have this kind. Well, but I mean, there is for example, in Trollope, in the small house, where a character is sort of abandons his lower class fiance for a richer fiance.
Yeah.
He immediately sort of regrets it, but he says to himself, Crosby is the character's name. He basically says, "Look, like I could get away with jilting this person, but if I tried to jilt this aristocrat, there'd be a breach of trust, there'd be a case, my name would be dragged through the mud, like I can't pull it off."
Which is actually not what history shows. It's actually it's the woman without money who would have actually been able to sue him, because she wouldn't have to pay her lawyers anything to take him to court. So, well,
I think in this case, it's also that he knows that the first woman would not be of the character to pursue such a.
I'm telling you what, more than one book that I have a reading on this, it was like the jury was all on their side. Even when the like the women would be pregnant, they would not kind of shame her. Like it would be all about, he did it. not, it's not her, and which the women who get pregnant out of marriage are not usually accepted in society, but in these court trials, they were frequently given money, and they were given more money than women who were not pregnant. And it just becomes a way to check these, kind of what society was saying is a way to check these kind of rakes, these kind of men who thought they could go and prey upon women. And so yeah, the actual reality was, if she was not of great character, she probably had a better chance of at least getting something for it, or at least not paying the court costs. He would at least have to pay for it, and his name is the one that gets attached to, that's the society bin, the people know that it's him. That publicity would happen to him. So that's interesting that Trollope does it the other way around. So,
and he has even somewhere, I don't remember it's in that novel, but it's in that series. He refers to Dodson and Fogg.
oh yeah,
It's sort of, what lawyers are like because of Dodson and Fogg kind of a moment.
it's not like a meta moment. That's
Yeah,
funny.
very cool. It's
No, I have to find that out. All righty, thank you. Well, back to this trial. Apparently, Stareleigh can't really hear. He hears, Sergeant Snubbin's assistant with him is Mr. Funky, and he says, Mr. Monkey, beg your lordship's pardon, Funky. Oh, very good. And then we'll get more names later that he can't quite hear. But it's Sergeant Buzfuz stands up to give his big, presentation to the jury. First, that he mentions that the damages they're looking for is £1,500, which is a lot of money, and actually is way over what we're awarded in these cases. I imagine I think there are some cases where it's extraordinarily rich people who were giving that kind of money out. That's really rare. Most of these cases would, it's £100 or £200 would be, what would be finally awarded to people, especially on average, about, £100 to £200 on average. But that's what's going on here. And his Buzfuzz's speech here is this is the showpiece, right? As still happens in courtroom, trial movies, right? You think like A Few Good Men and, and all that, but all throughout it's always this big speech, Inherit the Wind. Somebody's got, the lawyers get up and give these big speeches. And it helps kind of, not only is this a funny chapter and all the characters in it and the testimony going on, but Buzfuzz's big performance is kind of, really helps it become the showpiece for what Dickens then would use when he would read this aloud. Dickens begins giving dramatic readings of his works in the late 1840s. He starts doing some stuff with Christmas Carol, and then he continues, and then it's all for charity, and then he realizes that he can make money and later in his life, and then he's giving, in the 1860s, he's giving full readings and making a lot of money doing dramatic readings. And actually, the Trial of Pickwick, Jake, he is performed more than any other passage from any of his works. It's even more than Christmas Carol. Christmas Carol was the Trial of Pickwick was over 150 readings that he did in it. Christmas Carol is something like in the 130 or the 120 range.
I guess he had a few years head start.
No, because he doesn't start doing readings until after Christmas Carol is published. And while that's always a favorite, it's the Trial of Pickwick that leads the way. One reviewer wrote this is 1867. This is towards the end of his life when he's still doing it. this reviewer in the Guardian, in the Manchester Guardian, writes, "As for the trial from Pickwick, Mr. Dickens is not the only man who knows it by heart, but he is the only man who can add to its infinite humor. Talk to us of Garrick and his Protean powers. Mr. Justice Stareleigh and Mr. Sergeant Buzfuz and Mr. Nathaniel Winkle himself all appeared in succession in Mr. Dickens's face and voice." People loved him performing, and you got to imagine as you read through this must have been like the great one, and it's no wonder that he did 150 readings. I mean, this is a great tour de force of fun and comedy that he could just keep playing up. So, and didn't lead to him being killed, him dying like the murder of Nancy, and that kind of, you know, emotional anxiety that he had to go through in performing that really, you know, took its toll on his life towards the end. At the Rosenbach, we have a copy of a book that is not very beautifully bound. Let me share it here. And it is, it's 3 readings. It's not beautiful. You can see it's paper, you know, covers here. It's you know, it was never meant to last a long time, bound that way, but it is 3 readings. It's Bardell and Pickwick, Mr. Chops the Dwarf, which was a later short piece that he had written, and Mr. Bob Sawyer's Party, also from this novel, which was in serial part number 11. 3 readings, each in 1 chapter, privately printed. Now, this book wasn't for sale. This book was printed by William Clowes and Sons in London, and Dickens had these printed up. Here's the opening of the Bardell and Pickwick. He had, in 1866, he had about approximately 20 or so copies of this 3 readings made. And he had other ones too. There were other books that contained other readings from Copperfield and other things that he would have these very small limited editions printed up and would then give them to friends. There's also, I know in this particular one with Bardell and Pickwick, the Charles Dickens Museum has a marked up copy that was Dickens's reading copy. So he had to make up a copy that he could then mark up, and then also he had other copies that he would just give to friends. Oh, here's my readings. It's odd to think that he had become so famous he's already famous as a writer, but it's like a whole other sideline that he does, doing dramatic readings that everybody knows that he does, that also becomes, you know, part of the thing that he is as an author, as a writer, as a public figure, as he is someone who does these readings late in life. And it's not late in life. No, I say that, which is wrong, because he didn't think it was late in his life. Other people didn't think it was late in his life. He just happens to die young at 58. No one thought that. What's that?
Do you know, or have you how much does he adjust the text of this chapter for his readings?
I didn't go through and look, although I was tempted.
Some of them he really redoes quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean the Christmas Carol is well known now because his manuscript for his reduction is at the in New York. Is it the Morgan or the New York Public Library, one or the other? So we have those, and we have all of his readings. All of his readings have come down now, in this case, because they were printed. So we have them. For these short chapters, he doesn't cut out a ton. It's just here and there cutting them out, and he doesn't add much to them either. I think there's a mention at the end of this about the alibi, that he mentions like the name of Tony Weller's friend that he mentioned in the previous chapter. So he throws like a sentence from there in there to make that kind of work, but it's very little. It's just a matter of just condensing it some. But what he doesn't do is completely change it. He doesn't add things that are never in the text, and he doesn't adapt it in a way to make it markedly different than you just listening to him read from the book or anyone reading from the book. But of course, he practically writes to be read aloud anyway. He's very conscious of this text out loud. And James mentions in our chat that it's the Morgan has the manuscript for Christmas Carol and the NYPL has the marked up reading version of it. And you can easily find these online too, these marked up versions or these condensed versions or his reading versions. I shouldn't even call them condensed because it's really not so much a condensation as he's just cleaned it up a little and made it easier to perform in the exact, in a time frame that he wants to do them. All right. Well, now Sergeant Buzfuz is giving his oration here, and let's show one more picture. This is the kid drawing of Sergeant Buzfuz first. I'll get to the Fizz one because I just love the way this kid, and he talks about the chops, gracious heavens, and tomato sauce. But kid Joseph Clayton Clark did these wonderful, illustrations of Dickens characters and became famous for them in the later 19th century. And I thought I'd share that one before I share the actual one from the issue, which is here. Oops. And here it is. Here's Mr. Pickwick down at the bottom tier here with Perker next to him. Here's Mrs. Bardell crying here. Cluppins and Sanders. I'm not sure. I think this is Miss Cluppins. I'm not sure. Here's the boy. Here's Buzfuz there, right in the middle. Papers in hand, motioning toward. This is when he motions towards. I hear he's maybe somewhere in Mr. Pickwick, maybe present here somewhere. But just this opportunity too for Fizz to kind of do as many faces as he like. It's just faces all over that he gets to just have fun with everyone's expressions all throughout here. But of course, it's all men. Well, except for the three women in front here, it's all these faces, and especially in their wigs.
I love those two guys. They nose to nose.
Right back here, yeah.
Back.
Mr. Pickwick is shocked this is going on. So I could need to hear just a hat on the floor. That's what you did. You just put your hat on the floor under the table. I would never put my hat on the floor upside down like that in some dirty courtroom floor, but that's just what you did. There's no other place for it. So there you go. Well, let's see the oration here. He smotes the table with a mighty sound that he's being very, dramatic here. Talks about, at first he talks about the decease of Mr. Bardell. He says Mr. Bardell, after enjoying for many years the esteem and confidence of his sovereign as one of the guardians of his royal revenues, glided almost imperceptibly from the world to seek elsewhere for that repose and peace which a custom house can never afford. And then what does he say? What the Dickens, the narrator, says, the decease of Mr. Bardell, who had been knocked on the head with a quart pot in a public house cellar. And that's what we're in store for here. This is what lawyers do for, Dickens, and probably in real life. I'm not going to disparage lawyers now, but in Dickens's day, boy, it was, and for him, it's just this, they're painting a picture which doesn't really have any bearing on the reality. That's not what you don't go to you should be going to the court for, justice and for facts to be presented, but instead, this is what you get. He points out Pickwick there in the crowd and the villainy of him to, when I say the systematic villainy of Pickwick in seducing Mrs. Bart, as if she's, been as if she's pregnant and all this, but she's not. And part of the evidence is how he would treat her son and talk about the alley tours and comedies, which are kinds of marbles, which thankfully Dickens even rarely tells us what it is in the text. He glosses his own text, both of which I understand to be a particular species of marbles, much prized by the youth of this town. And here's the charge, though, from Buzfuz. He distinctly and in terms offered her marriage. Previously, however, taken special care that there would be no witness to their solemn contract. Well, if there's no witness, then why are there witnesses in this trial? So, but anyway. And then we get to the big evidence are these 2 letters that he has sent, which are hilarious. Can you read the letter, Garraway's?
Yes. Garraway's, 12 o'clock. Dear Mrs. B, chops and tomato sauce. Yours, Pickwick.
Gentlemen, what does this mean? Chops and tomato sauce. Yours, Pickwick. Chops! Gracious heavens. And tomato sauce? Gentlemen, is the happiness of a sensitive and confiding female to be trifled away by such shallow artifices as these? Chops and tomato sauce is hilarious. Some of you may have in your text, I've seen this, some editions, and I don't know if I think this happened in Dickens's life, that they started to correct tomata ending in an A to tomato ending in an O. But in the original serial part, it is tomata, ends in an A, which is funnier. Tomata is funnier than tomato. So, and then the second letter, read that one. Very short.
Dear Mrs. B, I shall not be at home till tomorrow. Slow coach. And then follows this very remarkable expression. Don't trouble yourself about the warming pan.
The warming pan! Why, gentlemen, who does trouble himself about a warming pan? When was the peace of mind of man or woman broken or disturbed by a warming pan, which is in itself a harmless, a useful, and I will add, gentlemen, a comforting article of domestic furniture? This warming pan is a mere cover for hidden fire, a mere substitute for some endearing word or promise, agreeably to a preconcerted system of correspondence artfully contrived by Pickwick with a view to his contemplated desertion. It's ridiculous and brilliant. Who would have thought? Who would have thought, Jake? I don't know, a tomato sauce and chops and the warming pan, and that would be this funny. And it's
Well, it's funny too in the combination of this serial number, right, with the critical analysis of the Valentine, right? We get this kind of doubled series of overreadings and misreadings and false readings. Like we were saying a little bit ago, with the sort of repeated different versions of the minutes kind of format. Again, we have a sort of pattern of ways of miscommunicating here.
Yeah, and the temperance and in this, but even then before, now you tied it in the Valentine, and Sam's way of kind of misspeaking, and what he's saying is not what he's meaning, and then of course signs it at the end. Love your lovesick Pickwick. The old, this is what Pickwick is being accused of. What Sam did in that letter is, and here it is. So this whole chapter is put together really well like this. and just a joy to read through. The absurd logic of all the of all these things, and then the witnesses come up, and it's more of the same, just funny stuff. Uh, but I just, Pickwick, who comes before you today with his heartless tomato sauce and warming pans. That's just great to to do, and it works really well out loud. They call up Mrs. Elizabeth Cluppins. The nearest usher called for Elizabeth Tuppins. Another one at a little distance off demanded Elizabeth Jupkins. And then a third rushed in a breathless state into King Street and screamed for Elizabeth Muffins till he was hoarse. She is called, and her testimony is that, well, basically, the door was on the jar. Partly open, my lord. She said on the jar, said the little judge with a cunning look. But she could hear, and you listened, I believe, Mrs. Cluppins, said Buzfuz. Begged your pardon, sir. I would scorn the action. The voices was very loud, sir, and forced themselves upon my ear. Yeah, so she was forced to hear Pickwick talk, but she doesn't know what he said. She just heard them. She knows they were up there. Pickwick was there talking to her, as if this is any evidence, right? Like it's, it takes like the merest, anybody could figure out that none of this is true, but the absurdity of comedy is that it's being believed because everyone in charge is an idiot. They call Winkle up now, and we get this great exchange here. Winkle, replied the witness. What's your Christian name, sir? Nathaniel, sir. Daniel? Nathaniel, sir. My lord, I mean. Nathaniel Daniel or Daniel Nathaniel? You were saying it's like who's on first routine, so or somebody was telling me it was like a who's on first routine. That's what you got going on here. And it's the judge, of course, because he can't really hear. How could I have got Daniel on my notes unless you told me so, sir? This argument was, of course, unanswerable. Winkle, of course, doesn't, he's like, I didn't, the way the which lawyer is it here? The Buzfuzz's assistant Skimpin.
Yeah.
And the way he twists the questions here, he says, first he says, will you he says, I heard him, did you hear him say anything? And then he says, I heard him call Mrs. Bardell a good creature. I heard him ask her to compose herself for what a situation it was, if anybody should come, or words to that effect. And then he twists it. He says, will you undertake to swear that Pickwick, the defendant, did not say on the occasion in question, my dear Mrs. Bardell, you're a good creature. Compose yourself to this situation, for to this situation you must come? Well, of course I can't swear that he didn't say that. I mean, that way he's catching him, but he's not catching him. It's just this play on the way the question is asked. But Winkle, of course, gets very flustered. And then when Mr. Funky, who's representing Pickwick, asks him about, his relationship with women, and isn't he always respectful and like a father to them? And he says, except on one trifling occasion, which I have no doubt might be easily explained. And now they're like, whoa, no. And Buzfuz asks the judge, if, what does he mean? And he doesn't want to say, but of course, what it is, it's the time when the episode from chapter 22, serial part number 8, when the middle-aged lady in yellow curl papers at the Great White Horse Inn at Ipswich is in her room, and Pickwick has mistaken her room for his, and he's in the bed. And of course, this is, very funny in that chapter, but not funny now. Don't tell that story now. But Winkle spills it out, and he can't help it. Well, we don't get the full readings from Tupman and Snodgrass. We just get a little bit that like it was basically the same thing. They're also,
Kind
driven
of
to the verge of, go ahead.
just that I think kind of brilliantly on Dickens's part there, that sort of we can picture the whole scene. He doesn't have to give it to us. And as
Yeah.
elaborate as the detail and as specific as the sort of transcriptions are for so much of this chapter, he knows that we don't have to get those cross examinations because we have all the character information to tell us what.
Yeah. And then we get the only other the person we get then is another one, Susanna Sanders, and it just gives him, the opportunity to be more ridiculous and pull in some other details that aren't connected but are just funny. That she was, did she know that they were engaged? Sure, because she had been told it herself by Mrs. Mudbury, which kept the mangle, and Mrs. Bunkin within which clear starched, but did not see either Mrs. Mudbury and Mrs. Bunkin. And it's just this, Mrs. Bardell knew this baker and he liked her, but he married someone else. So I guess he didn't really like her. And all this fun stuff goes on. The court asks her if he had ever called her. She says her husband has often called her duck, but never chops, nor yet tomata sauce. And then we get to the best one, of course. Sam Weller is called, and Sam stepped briskly into the box the instant his name was pronounced, and placing his hat on the floor and his arms on the rail, took a bird's eye view of the bar. And Sam is like, pleased as punch to be here. He is not Winkle, all worried and going to be flustered. This is Sam, and we know this, right? Do you spell it with a V or a W? Inquired the judge. That depends upon the taste and fancy of the speller, my lord. I never had occasion to spell it more than once or twice in my life, but I spells it with a V. And then, quite right, too, Samival. Put it down a wee, my lord. Put it down a wee. His dad shouting from the audience. And the judge wants him brought up, this person interrupting the court. And I love this. Do you know who that was, sir? I rather suspect it was my father, my lord. Do you see him here now? No, I don't, my lord, replied Sam, staring right up into the lantern at the roof of the court. So this little sly thing that Sam's not going to lie. I don't see him. You ask me if I see him. I don't see him because obviously he's not looking at him. Sam's just great here. Buzfuz tries to get him. Speak up, if you please, Mr. Weller. I mean to speak up, sir. I am in the service of that here gentleman, and very good service it is. Little to do and plenty to get, I suppose. Oh, quite enough to get, sir, as the soldier said when they ordered him 350 lashes. Little Wellerism thrown in. He says he's got a regular fit, a new clothes the morning of that they're talking about when Mrs. Bardell fainted. Sam got a regular new fit of clothes that morning. And that was a very particular and uncommon circumstance with me in those days. And the crowd starts laughing. He's entertaining them, right? The judge says, be careful. And Sam says, so Mr. Pickwick said at the time, my lord, and I was very careful that air suit of clothes, very careful indeed. And then, but Sam is so perfectly calm and serene, the judge says nothing. Sam knows how to antagonize and get away with it. So, you were in the passage and saw nothing of what was going forward, Buzfuz says. Have you a pair of eyes, Mr. Weller? Yes, I have a pair of eyes, and that's just it. If they was a pair of patent double million magnifying gas microscopes of extra power, perhaps, I might be able to see through a flight of stairs and a deal door, but being only eyes, you see, my vision's limited. Everybody laughs. Even the judge smiles, and Buzfuz has looked foolish. And now Sam is starting to get the better of Buzfuz. finally, then he asked him about the time when Sam went to pay the rent, but also to find out information about the trial or about what Mrs. Bardell is doing with her lawyers. And then Sam mentions in court that they said it was a very generous thing it was of them to have taken up the case on spec and to charge nothing at all for the cost unless they got them out of Mr. Pickwick. And this is not what Buzfuz and the legal team wants people to know, that the lawyers are not getting paid until they win, because people know, and this is what happened in this world. People knew this. Lawyers would go around and take these cases on speculation to, get money out of people who had money. So now, Buzfuz, I got to get him off here. I will not trouble the court by asking him any more questions. And then Sam says, would any other gentleman like to ask me anything? So he is fine as a witness here. This is the one you want. This is the one that Mr. Pickwick needed in the beginning before all this nonsense happened, right? If it was Sam instead of Winkle, he would have been maybe won the case.
But alas.
But alas, yes. The judge instructs the jury. I love the judge's instructions to the jury. If Mrs. Bardell were right, it was perfectly clear that Mr. Pickwick was wrong. If they thought the evidence of Mrs. Cluppins worthy of credence, they would believe it. If they didn't, why they wouldn't. All he does is just give them the basic. Either he wins or she wins. She's lying, he's lying. That's up to you. Which is not what judges would usually do. They would, kind of have a strong conviction already and would let the jury know that, judges would frequently let them know, this is the way I think you should go with this. So I'm advising you, we've seen this evidence. This is where it is. But of course, you're free to do whatever you want because you're the jury. He doesn't do that. He just, gives them their instructions and then he retires to his private room to refresh himself with a mutton chop and a glass of sherry. No tomato sauce, just a chop. And after a quarter of an hour, 15 minutes, they come in, they find for the plaintiff with 750 pounds in damages. Again, most cases would have been much lower than this. In reality, 100, 200 pounds, probably, they would have awarded. Or if the jury thought that this is ridiculous, they could have found in favor of her and but only awarded a pound in damages, because then they would know that she wouldn't have to pay her lawyers anything. So she would be off the hook for any court costs because she was found right for it. And Pickwick would have been required to pay court costs. He would have been required to pay her lawyers regardless. The 750 pounds of damages, I would imagine, does not include the court costs. That he's still going to have to pay her lawyers and whatever fees that they had to pay to, push things through to have this trial happen. We're at the end. Mr. Pickwick took off his spectacles, carefully wiped the glasses, folded them into their case, put them in his pocket, then, having drawn on his gloves with great nicety, and stared at the foreman all the while. He is not concerned about getting found liable for this. Dodson and Fogg are rubbing their hands, and Dickens said, "Why don't you read that? You may try."
May try and try and try again, Messieurs Dodson and Fogg, said Mr. Pickwick vehemently, but not one farthing of costs or damages do you ever get from me if I spend the rest of my existence in a debtor's prison.
And they don't believe that. Ha ha. You better think of that before next term, Mr. Pickwick. Now, what is going to happen here is he's responsible for paying. So what they're saying is, if you don't pay, which he knows, if he doesn't pay what he owes, they could file, an arrest warrant, and he'll be taken to debtor's prison and only let out when he's, paid off his debts. So that's the threat. Will Mr. Pickwick go to prison because he won't pay this, unjust, uh, these unjust damages that have been held against him? Tony Weller gets the last word. I know what had come of this here mode of doing business. Oh, Sammy, Sammy, why weren't there an alibi? So, nope, he has no alibi. How could we have an alibi? He caught her in his arms. She fainted on him. There's no alibi, but that's the way it is. So, well, tour de force chapter, I think, isn't it, Jake?
Really, two of them.
Yeah. And
only getting bigger and better as they go.
Yeah, and this is yeah, it is. And I think the rest of this novel we're just on an ascent here, that Dickens in full. And to think that he's also coming up with Oliver Twist every month. And this is early in his career. So early in his career, he's writing the deadline. I'm writing Oliver Twist for the first 2 weeks of the month, and then I'm writing Pickwick for the and it's just this ongoing, cycle he's on, and that he can be so creative and come up with this stuff that, he's just turned 25 years old. So not even Dickens at his full powers yet, which would be later in life. Well, Pickwickians, thank you for joining us for number 12 of Pickwick Monthly. Jake, thank you for joining us on our Pickwickian travels.
For having me.
Good luck on the court, and I envy you get to teach Great Expectations now with this with these students. How old are your students in this? Are they all undergrad?
They're undergraduates. They're sort of upper level undergraduates.
So they'll do the reading.
That's the idea. I'll report back next time.
All righty. Coming up next month, everyone, Kevin Quinn will return to discuss number 13, chapters 35 to 37, in which Mr. Pickwick goes to the city of Bath. We'll get a little Jane Austen there. No, it'll be much different when Mr. Pickwick visits Bath. And I will share with you some of the manuscript pages of Pickwick Papers that we have in the Rosenbach's collection. So we'll get to see the actual pages that Dickens first wrote and sent to the printers to be set. We have some of those for these chapters, and we'll actually have them for number 14 too, the following month. So again, let me remind you all to subscribe to our channel, to like these videos. You can support the Rosenbach through donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections. You could also become a member. Membership gives you early access and discounts to programs and courses. You can find out more at our website. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library, and I'll see you all next month for number 13 of the Pickwick Papers. Thanks, Jake. Bye-bye. And everyone, enjoy your glass of the invariable. That's what I'm having.